Mexico's two-party system lasted almost a century, but the incoming socialist president is about to change all that. In a special series this week, we travel across Mexico to examine the challenges facing the new leadership. I'm Adnan Nawaz, and today's newsmaker is Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador. He's known by his initials as AMLO. He campaigned against what he calls a power mafia. He describes Mexico's leaders as a corrupt group of elitists who've forgotten about the people they represent. Voters didn't just make AMLO the next president, they're taking him at his word. Thousands have been turning up at his headquarters, a nurse looking for work, a mother trying to get her son out of jail, a student needing help getting into college. They see AMLO as a man of the people. Others say he's a leftist radical in the mold of the late Venezuelan leader Hugo Chavez. Randolph Nogel begins our special series on Mexico with a report from the capital, which has not been immune to the country's sky-high murder rate and economic downturn.
Tú bien sabes que todos los boxeadores hemos pasado por necesidad, salir adelante, sobresalir. Y es un deporte bien duro, es uno de los deportes más duros.
He may have hung up his gloves long ago, but Jorge Vera is still fighting. His gym sits in the middle of a market in one of Mexico City's poorest areas.
Tepito es barrio bravo porque desde el tiempo, yo me acuerdo, tiempo de mis abuelos, eso, siempre barrio bravo porque no te dejabas. Eras una persona que eras bien luchona, no te dejabas, ¿sí? Por eso es barrio bravo de Tepito.
Tepito's boxing legacy is well known across Mexico. More national and world champion boxers have come from this neighborhood than anywhere else in the country. Jorge is one of them, a national champion. His picture is one of those lining the gym walls, along with his father's. And just like his father did for him, he's training young boxers in Tepito to perhaps one day become champions themselves, while keeping them away from gangs and drugs.
Dos chavos que yo estuve entrenando los mataron. ¿Por qué? Porque los chavos se querían sentir ya mejor, unos leones queriendo sobresalir de los demás.
Tepito is one of the many places in the country where poverty and violence intersect. But there's hope here that Mexico's president-elect, Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, and his left-wing Morena party will help millions of people break out of poverty.
Que tuviéramos una oportunidad de vida mejor, porque realmente la oportunidad de salir adelante es muy baja. Trabajas toda tu vida nada más para comer, no puedes hacer como grandes cosas.
Que le importe México más que nada, que no sea una persona como que nada más soy presidente para ganar dinero. Que le importe México realmente, el país, las personas, la pobreza del país, que le importe.
53 million people live below the poverty line in Mexico. That's more than 40% of the population. And a recent study found that 7 in 10 people born poor in Mexico will die poor.
There's been a massive upswell of citizen discontent with the system. And the system means two things. One is neoliberal privatizing public policies which have been taking away social protections from the people for decades. And on the other hand, massive corruption and violence. So a real collapse of institutions and the rule of law.
What has also fueled public anger has been a number of public scandals under the administration of President Enrique Peña Nieto.
Mexico historically has been renowned throughout Latin America as being a particularly presidentialist system in which the Mexican people respect and honor their president even in the midst of economic crisis or corruption crisis. But with Enrique Peña Nieto, this has changed. All of a sudden, Mexicans no longer see their president as a protecting figure, but as someone who's directly attacking them, taking away their wealth and taking away their security.
Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador has promised to lead by example. He's refused bodyguards and plans to sell off the presidential plane. And he says he won't live in the opulent 19th century presidential residence. Promises which further cultivate his image as a man of the people, and one in stark contrast to outgoing President Enrique Peña Nieto. Along with building up social programs to address poverty, Lopez Obrador has promised a community-based approach to policing. He's promoting it as a way to reduce violence, which is currently at record levels.
This last year, 2017, has been the most violence in Mexico's modern history. And if the rate continues of homicides, the one we have now, this will be the most violent year in Mexican modern history.
La revolución de las conciencias.
The stark reality of both poverty and violence in Mexico means that Lopez Obrador will be under pressure from the day he's sworn into office in December.
Voy al gimnasio, ¿eh? ¿El gimnasio?
Sí.
Ahorita vengo.
We have to reduce violence in Mexico because it really have affected the welfare of the Mexican population, not only in material or physical terms, but also psychologically.
Entonces, ojalá el Señor la tome por una ruta buena y nos ayude en el barrio, y no en el barrio, todo México, porque también hay partes que están bien jodidos.
Jorge knows what's at stake. His son was killed 2 years ago in a carjacking.
Quererle quitar su carro son cosas que nunca la voy a olvidar, porque pues no lo voy a olvidar. A mi hijo, y bien chavo, falleció mi hijo, me lo mataron mi chavo, y pues la vida debe de seguir. Tengo mis nietos, tengo mis hijos, y pues, tengo que aventarle para adelante. Me quedo atrás, no voy a hacer nada. Mi lema es aventarle para adelante y siempre aventarle para adelante.
And perhaps in moving forward, he'll keep hope alive that things will get better, and that Mexico's new leadership will overcome improbable odds, just as he has.
Yo desde que me metí al box, yo sabía que la tenía que hacer, levantarme, me tumban, me vuelvo a parar, y me tumbaron y aquí estoy parado. Y esa es preferencia. Seguir adelante, échale huevos. Eso es todo. En serio. Siempre del diario, pues le estamos luchando, ¿no? Salimos a la calle y pues hay que luchar, porque la calle está fuerte. Para pues, seguir tu camino, adelante, ¿no? La vida es luchar. La vida es luchar.
Randolph Nogel reporting from Mexico City. Well, to discuss the country's incoming president and the challenges he faces, I'm joined by the editor of El Heraldo newspaper, Jose Carreño. And we have Marco Antonio Fernandez. He's a research professor at the Monterrey Institute of Technology and Higher Education. From the University of San Diego, Professor David Shirk joins us. He has written and edited several books about Mexican crime and politics. Welcome to the Newsmakers, all three of you. Jose, whichever way you look at it, whether you're pro or anti-Obrador, whether you're left or right, this is a new dawn for Mexico, is it not? Just give us your outstanding thoughts about the presidency of Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, who, after this question, I at least will refer to as AMLO.
Well, his perspectives are good in the sense that he has a lot of support. He has virtually the control of the country in the sense that he will have a Congress on his favor, a judiciary power that will be very much leaning for him, and a public opinion that is very much open and expectant for his deeds. However, his problem will be that to put the promises to effect. That will be the main issue, because a lot of people in Mexico expects that it will be a virtual miracle and that things will change from one day to the next. And this is an expectation that he and his people are trying to damp down. Otherwise, he might face a very fast demise of his political honeymoon. So Mr. Lopez Obrador has a very daunting challenge. He has there is a lot of expectations, there is a lot of sympathy, but the hopes might be quelled very soon.
Interesting. Marco, you have a fairly unique perspective in terms of the panelists that we're speaking to today, because you've been talking to the incoming government about potential reforms that need to be undertaken. What are your greatest concerns for AMLO's new leadership?
Well, I mean, as Jose mentioned, undoubtedly, I mean, it's a president that is arriving with a huge expectation, with a broad support of the Mexican citizens who clearly sent him a mandate basically to fight corruption, to develop the rule of law in Mexico, and to evade poverty and inequality. And in that sense, I mean, these are key areas that are essential for development in Mexico, and that it's going to have a hard time, the new government, to fulfill these expectations. I mean, at the core of the main problems of Mexico undoubtedly is the lack of the rule of law. I mean, clearly the institutions in charge of bringing justice to Mexico are very weak. And in that sense, I mean, I would say that the main challenge that the incoming president has is to develop a real civil service that is capable to develop the policies necessary to fulfill the expectations and to achieve good results in these areas, in the area of the rule of law, in fight effectively poverty and evade inequality, and once and for all finish or curb at least the huge corruption problems that Mexico is facing. And in that sense, I would say that so far we have seen positive and also worrisome signs on the proposals that the new government is trying to develop.
David, all of these challenges are not unique to Mexico. On the other side of the world, a new leader has been elected in Pakistan who faces almost the mirror problems that Mexico is facing. What is it that's particular to Mexico that will make AMLO's job in terms of the reforms necessary easier or more difficult?
I think that's a great question. I'm not an expert on Pakistan, so I can't quite make the comparison, but I think for Mexico, one of the things that could make Mexico's job, AMLO's job, both easier and harder is that it is located so close to the United States. Mexicans often lament the problem by saying, poor Mexico, so close to the United States, so far from God. And maybe Pakistan has the opposite problem. But I think that for Lopez Obrador, his greatest challenge, this challenge of rule of law, is significantly complicated by the war on drugs. And it's something that his government is going to try to change in a very dramatic way over the next few years, possibly moving towards legalization of drugs, et cetera. But it is, unfortunately, Mexico's dilemma that it is located right next to the United States, which is the world's largest market for drugs, and also the leading champion of the current drug policy regime around the world. So Lopez Obrador has a very sticky challenge, I think, in trying to navigate that particular issue, and of course, that will complicate his ability to achieve rule of law in a country where, unfortunately, there's a high degree of corruption and a high degree of violence.
Marco, can you pick up on that and give us some examples of how you might advise the new government how it could best go about trying to address these issues that David and you are both talking about?
Yes, I mean, from the academia and from civil society organizations, a group of us have been working for a long time in trying to develop, for example, a series of proposals to reform the Justice Department in Mexico. I mean, clearly at the core of the corruption and the impossibility of really tackling the violence and in generally the crimes in Mexico, it's the problem of the lack of a real Justice Department that is composed by merit-based people. Right now, unfortunately, most of, for example, of the police and the investigators are not appointed based on their merit, but basically because of their personal relationships or partisan considerations. And in order to change this situation, we need to go through a serious discussion on how to create a legal framework that establishes the basis for a professional justice department where it is essential to have a political independence, but that political independence, in order to really produce results, needs to be accompanied precisely by reforms that professionalize the way that this Justice Department has worked so far. I mean, in things, basic things like the capacity of the current authorities to follow the money is non-existent. I mean, many of corruption cases in Mexico are not brought to justice because the authorities not only lack the independence, but lack the skills to make an effective investigation where they follow all the national and international transactions, where the networks of corruption tend to allocate the misuse of public funds that they are currently using for corrupt purposes.
Okay, Jose, I promise I'm not ignoring you, and I will come to you in just a minute. But just to continue this theme, David, police investigate just a quarter of murders in Mexico. 2017 saw the highest murder rate in the country's history. How can one presidential term sort all of these problems out? Judiciary, police investigations, violence, all of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In fact, most of those crimes, most of those murders that Mexico saw last year, over 30,000 murders, occurred at the state or local level and will be adjudicated by the state prosecutors and state and local police. So the president's ability to make change is somewhat symbolic. There are a couple of things that I think Lopez Obrador is trying to do that will be important. As Marco mentioned, the fact that there is a new model for the Justice Department in Mexico, a new national prosecutor, could be very important in going after some high-profile criminals. But you're correct that this is not a job that one person alone is going to be building. The rule of law is not the job of one man. And one of the things that's going to help Lopez Obrador, I think, is that under the previous administration, there was a political reform that allows mayors and legislators to be reelected, which will ensure continuity in government at the local level in a way that may help to build professional police forces. I think it's something that people don't often focus on, but one of the great problems for police professionalism and even judicial sector professionalism in Mexico is the very high rate of turnover. People enter these jobs and they leave quickly because there's no incentive, no professional incentive to stay. So I'm hopeful that Lopez Obrador will have some conditions that will assist him, as well as many people working at the state and local level, to try to improve the rule of law in Mexico over the next 6 years and hopefully over the next few decades.
Okay, I'll come back to policies in a minute, but Jose, let's talk about the man himself. In our report, Randolph, who's been in Mexico making this series of special reports from Mexico, on which we'll concentrate in more detail and dig in further during the week. Randolph says that AMLO is not going to take advantage of some of the benefits that come from the presidency. It suggests from the outside someone like Uruguay's Jose Mujica, a very humble man. What is he like?
Well, the problem is that there are some things that he has promised that have had very good reception among the people, meaning not the traps of the presidency, to leave Los Pinos residents, etc., which sounds very well. However, in terms of pragmatism, in practical terms, they are a bit more difficult. For instance, he canceled the presidential airplane, which is okay, no problem. But maybe he needs to have a more modest airplane for his travels around the country, because he will be traveling a lot. And he cannot rely on commercial or rented airlines. So that is one part. Those are small things that could build up to a number of other issues. Now, Lopez Obrador has a very interesting personality. Some people believe that he's a mixture of religious and political. Some people believe that he's sort of messianic. However, he appears to be a very well-grounded person. Either you agree or not with him, you have to accept that he is a man with a huge charisma and that people follows him. However, the next problem is that in Mexico, traditionally, the president is seen as a sort of a big father, the big giver of things, and the big donor. So he will have to face that sort of expectations with a more reduced budget, with a more reduced administrative corps by his own will. So it will be, I think he will find a number of problems.
Okay, Jose, let's stay with you. 1% of the population owns about half of Mexico's wealth. 53+ million people living below the poverty line. The Oxfam Mexico executive director says 48% of state schools have no access to sewage, 31% have no drinking water, 12.8% have no bathrooms or toilets, 11.2% have no access to electricity. Just a few examples of the inequality in Mexico. He's a socialist leader, but that presents a challenge in itself. Most of the world follows the neoliberal path. Those who choose the other path, they find their challenges are accentuated because at the end of the day, economics is also about money. Where's he going to get the money to do all of this and reduce the inequality?
That is part of his real challenge. He needs to convince that 1% that you mentioned to start investing in the country. He has to convince foreign companies that Mexico is a safe place to invest, so they will not be risking their investment. He has to convince Western Europe, he has to convince the US, he has to convince Asia to try that Mexico is a safe and good place to make business and a good base to make business towards the US and Latin America. So he has to give the rule of the law as a guarantee of that. He has to go for that. Second, he has to hurry up in terms of education. A big part of the problem is that a lot of the people that you mentioned, that is in the lower rungs of economic society, is also in the lowest rungs in terms of education and preparation. He has to train people. He has to find ways or create programs to train people. He believed that a lot of the money will come from the savings on corruption. He might be right to a degree, but that will never be enough for the huge needs of a country that has about 50 million, 60 million people in poverty and or below the levels of poverty. So the problem is, again, that I believe that the expectations are too many for the government of one person for 6 years.
Okay. 60 seconds each, David and Marcos, starting with you, David. But please, 60 seconds. You've been nodding while Jose has been talking.
I completely agree. The challenges are huge. Lopez Obrador has talked about trying to improve oil revenues, reduce corruption, and other ways of sort of becoming more efficient or better able to generate revenues. There is no escaping the fact that with such an extreme maldistribution of wealth and income, there will be a need, if Mexico truly wants to advance, to redistribute the pie. And that is ultimately what will be the most polemical and challenging thing for this government, because at the end of the day, Mexico's privileged and Mexico's wealthy will not want to have to give up the enormous share of the pie that they already control. And frankly, that's a debate that we have to deal with here in the United States, and it's a debate that I think is going to have to happen over the next several years around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Marco, over to you. Does being a socialist make AMLO an enemy of the rich, of the elite, of the establishment? And how does he get across his message to them?
I mean, I think that's just adding to what David and Jose mentioned. I mean, the real challenge for Lopez Obrador is that he understands symbols in politics. And that's why he's sending the first messages of austerity, for example, this idea that he's going to sell the presidential airplane or reduce salaries of top bureaucrats in order to consolidate the legitimacy on a new way of making public expenditure in Mexico. However, if it's true that there's going to be some savings if corruption is curbed, unavoidably, as in Mexico, we will need to have a serious discussion on tax reform, and that is popularly a sensitive issue. So far, he has promised that he's not going to raise taxes, but in order to really redistribute wealth in Mexico, two things are necessary. On the one hand, tax reform, but also effective evidence-based policies that leave aside the clientelistic networks that traditionally have translated in misuse of the social programs precisely that supposedly are tackling poverty and inequality in Mexico. And that is going to be a huge challenge for the incoming president.
Okay, Marco, thank you very much indeed. David and Jose as well, a great way to start our special, our week-long special on Mexico. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Coming up on the Newsmakers is the White House trying to dismantle the UN agency that supports Palestinian refugees. And Boris Johnson rails against the burqa. Does the face veil pose a threat, or is the former Foreign Secretary pandering to Islamophobic voters? The White House is reportedly trying to shut down the UN agency that provides aid to more than 5 million Palestinian refugees. Foreign Policy magazine has released leaked emails from presidential advisor Jared Kushner, which heavily criticized the existence of the agency known as UNRWA. The US administration is lending credibility to those reports by announcing a radical cut to the agency's funding, causing UNRWA to lay off hundreds of people. Natalie Pahonen takes a closer look.
In Gaza, school's out for summer. These children are some of the 240,000 who attend schools here run by UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. But there's no guarantee these students will have a school to study in when the new term begins. The agency's budget has been slashed after its largest donor, the United States, cut its funding. The US had pledged $365 million this year, but has only provided $60 million.
So far, we have a $217 million shortfall. We don't know whether we'll open the schools this year.
El Radwan is worried about her 5 school-aged children.
Closing the agency causes a lot of fear. We barely get by when they go to schools, so how will it be when they stopped going? Ignorance will spread everywhere in the country.
UNRWA operates in 5 areas in the Middle East. When it began operating in 1950, it provided aid to 750,000 Palestinian refugees. Today, it helps more than 5 million people. It provides food, healthcare, education, and microfinance to start small businesses. But now its very existence is being challenged by the United States Middle East peace envoy, Jared Kushner. Foreign Policy magazine published excerpts of emails from Kushner in which he said, "It is important to have an honest and sincere effort to disrupt UNRWA. This agency perpetuates a status quo, is corrupt, inefficient, and doesn't help peace." Kushner's father-in-law, US President Donald Trump, said in January, "With the Palestinians no longer willing to talk peace, why should we make any of these massive payments to them?" Millions of Palestinian refugees rely on UNRWA for humanitarian assistance. But can they continue to count on that support if the agency's main foreign donor seems intent on dismantling it? Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Joining me from London is the UNRWA spokesman, Christopher Gunness. In Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank, we have the former spokeswoman for the Palestinian Authority, Noor Odeh. And in Tel Aviv is Israel's former deputy foreign minister and Israeli ambassador to the United States, Danny Eyal. All three of you, thank you very much indeed for your time. We have to start with the nuts and bolts of one particular issue, which is about categorizing the people that UNRWA helps. So, Danny, first of all, of course, we all know that it helps and works with Palestinian refugees. These people, Israel refuses to accept have any right to return to their lands. The Israeli state doesn't even classify them as refugees. So why is there a discrepancy in the way the Israeli state categorizes those people, Palestinians, compared to Jews who do have a right to return wherever they may have ended up in the world?
Adnan, the question is a good one, and the answer is very simple, and it's based on historical facts and also on international law. You know, you don't talk about Palestinian refugees anymore. We're talking about third, fourth, sometimes fifth generation of those who were born of the displaced people, the poor displaced people that I am very sorry about because of the result of the war in 1948. But if you compare the refugees, which are still called refugees, the Palestinian refugees, to all other refugees in the world, I'm talking about dozens of millions of refugees in Africa, in Syria, in Bosnia, you name it. They are not called refugees after the first generation. Why? Because the host countries have an obligation to receive them, to naturalize them, to give them civil rights. This was denied out of the Palestinians for political reasons. And there is no one who can really explain why, for all those millions of refugees around the world, there is one organization by the UN, and there is a specific organization just for Palestinian refugees. So I believe that we have every right to deny. There is no right here, and there is no return. As I mentioned, we are talking about people, and I respect each and every one of them, who were born either in Lebanon or in Gaza or in the West Bank or in Syria or in Jordan. They are not Israelis, and they have no right to come to Israel.
Noor, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, it's a new way of looking at facts, pretty convenient given the U.S. administration and its position. But I want to remind your guest that thousands of Palestinians were killed by Israeli troops between 1947 and 1950, trying to return to the homes they were uprooted from systematically and quite violently, and they lost their lives trying to do that. The fact that Palestinian refugees remain still around the world, even those of them who are not in refugee camps, still consider themselves refugees, and that's what matters. This crisis, the question of Palestine and the question of Palestine refugees wasn't born out of a natural disaster. It wasn't born out of civil war. It was born out of ethnic cleansing, a very systematic campaign of ethnic cleansing. We call it the Nakba, or catastrophe, and it was
which was done by the Israeli, which was done by the Palestinian Arabs, and they lost.
Okay, Noor, do you want to just conclude that thought?
So what? You can get away with ethnic cleansing. You can get away with ethnic cleansing if you won. Is that the new script in the international law? Is that how this is supposed to go?
You can get away with anything except revisionism of history. You cannot rewrite. I'm sorry, you cannot rewrite history. You are rewriting history, and this is the real tragedy of the Palestinian people.
There was no ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
They're believing
Your
in their
official
own
records
facts.
don't talk about the systematic killing and massacres.
Listen, we know you will both. Please, we know you will disagree about how the status of these people was created, but we're talking specifically about these people and the agency that helps them. So, Chris Gunness, it seems to me as if Danny is saying that because the UNHCR exists, there's no reason for UNRWA to exist. You shouldn't have a job. You shouldn't be doing it.
I feel as if I'm coming in to separate the warring parties like some kind of UN peacekeeping operation. Danny, if I could speak, you've had a fair chance to speak. If you could just let me speak uninterrupted, please.
Absolutely.
UNHCR,
I'm sorry. Okay.
Thank you. UNHCR confers refugee status through the generations. It is simply not true that UNRWA uniquely confers status to refugees' children. If you look at the latest UNHCR report of refugees around the world, it's very clear that they are passing on in places like Pakistan, where there are protracted refugee situations, refugee situations which are protracted across Africa. UNHCR confers refugee status where there is an unresolved political plight. And it's very clear that the Palestinians have an unresolved political plight. The parties to the conflict have not been able to make any progress, meaningful progress, since Oslo for a very long time. The other point I'd like to make is that the General Assembly is the organ here, and Ambassador Eyal knows very well what we're talking about here. 167 countries last voted to extend our mandate, including the definition of refugees, by 167 votes to 1. It is very clear that these people, the General Assembly has determined that these are refugees. They have UNRWA to give them services until there is a just and durable solution. It is the lack of a durable solution. It is the conflict that perpetuates UNRWA. It is not UNRWA that perpetuates the conflict.
Okay, can we look at the future of refugees as far as the peace process is concerned? As you all know, the 1990s Oslo Accord, it had permanent issues that it identified. One of those, as far as the US is concerned, has disappeared because Donald Trump has now recognized, as far as America is concerned, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. The future of refugees is critical also to the Oslo Accords. Does it look now to you, Noor, and I'll come to you in a minute, Danny, does it look now to you, Noor, as if the Trump administration is trying to dismantle all of the permanent issues that arose from the Oslo Accords one by one?
I think that is what the Trump administration thinks it can do. But the Trump administration, with its illegal announcement on Jerusalem, thought that it can take Jerusalem off the table. And it was told very clearly by the international community that Jerusalem is not the US's to put on or off any table, and that, again, there is such a thing as international law, and there are standards and obligations, international obligations that states must abide by, and they have, by and large, so far. The issue of Palestine refugees, as Chris so eloquently put it, is an issue that perpetuates because the conflict continues, and it is allowed to continue because Israel is allowed to maintain its regime of occupation and to refuse to end this conflict in a manner that is in line with international law. The question of refugees is one of the permanent status issues, and it is the parties had agreed that a solution, an agreed on and just solution, would be reached in line with UN resolutions, including 194, which talks about the Palestinian refugees' right of return and or compensation. Having said that, I think what we have right now is a division in the international system, where you have the American administration, the team responsible for the Middle East, led by Jared Kushner, a team of zealots and ideologues, really, who believe that they can extort positions from the Palestinians by denying them money, by starving the UN agency responsible for assisting millions of refugees worldwide, by playing with life and death services for millions of Palestinians, exchanging that for humanitarian services and for other, day-to-day things. Okay. And you have the international community, on the other hand, which has renewed the mandate of UNRWA and has not recognized the American or Israeli position. Okay, let's and that's where we stand. The Palestinians are in line with the majority. We need to get the other side of the opinion and move the debate on. Danny, what's the situation, as far as you know, of the Israeli government? Because there are reports that actually the government a few months ago asked the US administration
please don't cut funding to UNRWA because it may create more violence on the Gaza-Israel border, that it may worsen the humanitarian situation. What about that request and how it goes along with the way Israel sees the status of these Palestinian refugees and how that ties into the peace process?
Well, we believe that Palestinians, which are in plight, you call them refugees, which is fine, but one thing they do not have the right to do, and this is the Palestinian Authority. They do not have the right, the moral authority, the moral, I would say, basis, let alone the legal basis, to pay and to encourage terrorists, Palestinian terrorists, to kill Israelis. And the reason why the Trump administration is looking into the funds to the Palestinians and threatening to cut them is all in the hands of Abu Mazen. They tell him, listen, if you stop paying and encouraging terrorists to kill children and women or any innocent people, we are denying you the same money that you're giving to them. Also, they have all these incitements. So I would like to tell Noor, which doesn't have the dignity to mention my name is Danny, by the way, is that the problems of the Palestinians is by their leaders, because they have been offered fair and generous solutions and concessions from successive Israeli governments. And if I go back all the way to 1937, 47 and on, the two-state solution was offered back already in 37. The Jews accepted, the Arabs didn't, by the way. We were all Palestinians. Palestine was a British mandate. My parents were Palestinian Jews, as they were Palestinian Arabs. And the day that the UN decided on a two-state solutions for two peoples, and the Jews, according to UN resolutions, which you all the time mention, UN resolutions, yes, they declared independence. Their neighbors, the Palestinian Arabs, were attacking their neighbors. It started as a civil war.
Are you willing to adhere to the partition resolution?
Coming and invading.
Okay.
Would you go back to the borders outlined in 181?
No,
I think we have been doing
please.
it all along, including in Oslo, including in Annapolis, all the time.
Okay.
But unfortunately, I do not see the same kind of attitude from your leaders.
Danny, no, we have to leave that there. Okay, Chris, is the United States, is the Trump administration trying to close UNRWA down? Is that its eventual aim? Does your organization believe that?
Well, you'd need to ask that question of the Trump administration. Danny seems to be suggesting that in order to punish the Palestinian president, funds are being cut from UNRWA, and I find the logic of that quite hard to understand, if indeed that argument is true. What I would say is that, yes, if UNRWA does not find the funds to make up the $305 million deficit that the American administration has left us with, in a matter of days, we may have to announce that we can't open our schools. That means that 272,000 children in Gaza will not be in UN schools. They may be in someone else's schools, or they may be on the streets of Gaza. And I fail to see how it is in the interests of Israel, in Israel's security interests, in the interests of anyone who believes in peace in the Middle East, to have 272,000 children on the streets of Gaza. I fail to see why it's in anyone's interest to have over 1 million food insecure people without food rations. I find it hard to believe that anyone thinks it's in the interest to close down 21 primary health clinics giving life-saving services. And I'm sure Danny would have big problems with that too, because that is the implication of this defund from the Americans. And I think that is why just today there's a report that Israel Hayom, one of the largest newspapers, one of the big popular red tops in Israel, has a report that the Israeli government or Israeli officials are approaching the Trump administration to say, no, don't cut the funds from UNRWA. Because guess what? It's the Israeli establishment, particularly the Israeli defense establishment, which realizes what the dire consequences of closing UNRWA down. Now, of course, we advance more than... Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Chris, we have run out of time. So Chris, Noor and Danny, thank you for joining us on The Newsmakers.
The government believes that the question of how a woman should dress is a matter for a woman's individual choice. Nobody should be trying to tell a woman how to dress. as we discuss these issues and openly discuss these issues, it's imperative that everybody is careful in the language that they use. It's very clear that the language that Boris Johnson used to describe people's appearance has caused offence.
The British Prime Minister Theresa May is demanding an apology from her former Foreign Secretary after he criticised women who wear the burqa. He wrote in a newspaper column that they look like letterboxes and bank robbers. Boris Johnson has so far refused to answer reporters' questions about his controversial comments. Muslim groups and many others, they say he's using Islamophobia to court conservative voters. Johnson's supporters, well, they defend his right to free speech. They point out he never actually called for a ban on the burqa. They also argue that it's an oppressive piece of clothing. Let's go to Cardiff in Wales and speak to Sahar Al-Faifi. She's a Muslim rights activist, a community organiser and a molecular geneticist. Sahar, thank you very much for joining us on The Newsmakers. Why do you cover your face?
Why do I wear the face veil, the niqab? It's an act of worship. It's an act of devotion. It is part of my personal spiritual journey. It's never that someone forced me to wear it, or is never been an oppressive or suppressive for me, as some of the politicians are suggesting.
It's not just politicians, is it? There is a group of white conservative men in the UK who continue to give their opinions about what Muslim women should and should not wear. Why are they doing that, do you think?
It's true, and I pray for the day where we never discuss what women should wear and she shouldn't. There are many reasons. I mean, this part of discussion around the face veil plays a big part of the Islamophobia industry out there. There are minorities who happen to be vocal, who are willing to scapegoat minorities, including Muslims, just to gain a political vote. We know that Boris Johnson made his comments at the right time, knowing that it's the silly season for the media. They are looking for the news, and he's aiming to get the populist vote, sadly, in the expenses of Muslim women's safety.
Silly season in the UK is what they call the period of the summer when Parliament is on holiday. Do you think Boris Johnson is an Islamophobe?
I think his comments definitely are Islamophobic and racist, not only just insulting.
But he's received quite a lot of support for his article, and not just from right-wingers. There are other people. There was one respondent, it's just one example, writing in response to an analysis of what he said in a liberal newspaper in the United Kingdom. And this person wrote, how can wearing one, in other words, a burqa, considered to help integration? It's about time the UK brought in a similar law. It is and never will be accepted dress in a civilized society, says this person.
You know, this is one of the things you always hear when it comes into discussion around minorities and immigrants communities, that they're not integrating enough, they're not doing enough. And it's sad to hear that, because we know the British Muslim community is the most charitable community. 20 staff are actually Muslim, and we are contributing to the society. But what you see that Islamophobic sentiments across the political spectrum. I'm not talking about UKIP and EDL. We have seen Boris Johnson making these comments. Jack Straw from the Labour Party, he made similar comments back in 2006 because of how much Islamophobia has been normalised. And when they are talking about that we're not integrating enough, I think they are confusing the concepts of assimilation with integration. What they are looking for is an absolute assimilation, where minorities or people of faith or colour or different background are diluting their identity, so much so they become unrecognisable. And for them, this is what is integration. Sadly, in my view, or sadly in their view, but in my view, this is not integration. Integration is being who you are, proud of your identity and faith, and contributing to the society, becoming an active citizen.
The integration question is really interesting because it can work both ways, of course. People who support Boris Johnson in this particular issue, they say that wearing the burqa, the niqab, means that those people who wear it aren't fully integrated. But on the other side, allowing people and accepting that different cultures are part of a host society, that can also, of course, indicate that those Western societies are more accepting of integration and are kind of reciprocally engaging with integration because they say, yes, you're from a different culture, wear what you like, as long as you're not harming me.
Exactly. This is how it should be. I mean, this is our part of British culture. Diversity and multiculturalism is deeply rooted. But sadly, these Islamophobe and the politicians of fear, they would prefer to use the face veil as a polarizing tool, not only to divide us, but also to distract us from the more important issues. I mean, until when are we going to discuss or dictate what women's wear and or doesn't wear, forgetting the more important issues like Brexit and NHS and employment and all of that? These are the things that need to be discussed, not this piece of fabric that I chose to wear.
Sure, okay, distraction as a political tool, integration as a cultural analysis. What about security? Chad, for example, in Africa. In 2015, there were 2 suicide attackers who had full burqa, and security can become an issue. In the UK, when a courier enters a bank, he or she has to take off their helmet because the camera has to be able to focus on their face. What about the security issue of hiding one's face?
National security is a concern for everyone, Muslims and other people of different faith and so on. But the security narrative is a false narrative, because someone who chose to wear the face veil like me, I absolutely have no problem to reveal my identity whenever is needed, you know, whether it's an airport or security checks and so on. For me, is a practice of faith that I do as much as I can, and whenever is needed, I am like anyone else following the law. But the problem with this narrative is that they are suggesting somehow veiled Muslim women is prone to commit terrorist attacks. And even if there are cases like the one you mentioned in Chad, is it actually fair to prosecute a whole community for 2 individuals who committed these horrific crimes and undermine their liberties or undermine their freedom? This is also one issue to follow up on this, that it's not really about Muslim women who chose to wear it. It's not a Muslim issue. It's more of a civil liberties issues, because, you know, we live in a very diverse society. We must respect individual liberties. And someone might wonder, if they go on to discuss the face veil today, are they going to discuss the turban tomorrow? Or are they going to discuss the Jewish kippah and so on? So it's fundamental to our understanding that we respect our civil liberties.
Sahar Al-Faifi, thank you for sharing your opinions with us on The Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Adnan Nawaz. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, the Turkish lira hits another record low. What's to blame? Poor economic policy or a foreign conspiracy? Until then, thanks for watching. Goodbye.